It's The Real News. I'm Aaron Mate, continuing with Tim Shorrock, correspondent for The Nation, whose blog, Dispatch Korea, is at timshorrock.com. And we're talking about President Trump's cancellation of his June 12th summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Now Trump says the two sides are talking again and the meeting could be back on. So, Tim, I want to play for you a clip of Senator Lindsey Graham. He was speaking today on the Today Show, and he said that the cancellation of the summit, which of course he blamed on North Korea, makes war far more likely.
Senator, the foreign minister of North Korea last week said, we're not giving up our nuclear program. Denuclearization is off the table, is what he said, which is the entire objective, I imagine, from where you're sitting and from where the president's sitting. So if that's true and they won't agree to give up their nukes, where does that leave you? What's the objective now?
Military objective.
Is that where we are now?
That's where we're headed. If that statement holds true, and I don't believe it, I believe they believe that Trump will use military force. For 30 years, they have played us. They understand our election cycle. They're trying to run out the clock. They understand that 2019 is the year before a presidential election. They think Trump's just like everybody else. He's not.
That's Senator Lindsey Graham speaking on the Today Show on Friday. So, Tim, Graham is saying there also that that because he says North Korea has been playing the U.S. for 30 years, and if they are insisting that they will not fully denuclearize, in his characterization, that's actually what makes war more likely. If you could respond to what he said there.
First of all, the question itself to Graham was wrong. They did not say they would not negotiate about their nuclear weapons. They said they would not surrender their nuclear weapons, without some kind of negotiation and discussion about broader issues and dealing with the American hostile policy, which is what they're concerned about. So the question in itself was wrong. But Senator Lindsey Graham is like the biggest warmonger out there. He just loves the idea of a war with Korea, and that's what he really wants, I think. And he's always talking about this. I mean, well, what was really interesting was, he is about what's interesting about Senator Graham is that, he's really detested in South Korea because of the things he said. This man has just no credibility at all. And I've talked to people in South Korea who tell me that, his name is now mud there because. And he's seen as a very, very dangerous man, which I agree that he is. So I don't really, think that anything he says, has much to do with reality at all. He would just love to see a war.
Tim, what you pointed out there is really important because it speaks to the power of Western propaganda and how misconceptions and the dominant Western narratives about North Korea can then shape how journalists cover it. And I didn't know what you pointed out, which is that the characterization of what the North Korean minister said about denuclearization was wrong, because what the reality that you pointed out totally undermines the premise of the question. It speaks to how powerful the dominant sort of hawkish narratives are. You mentioned, though, the people of South Korea. So let me ask you, what do you think the reaction is there right now? Certainly hopes have been really high for the summit taking place. And talk about the mobilization around peace, promoting a reconciliation with the North that's been happening in South Korea.
Well, ever since this process began and as it deepened, the support for Moon Jae-in and the support for the peace process within South Korea has been very high, very strong. And, Moon's popularity is around 85% now, which is kind of unbelievable for any leader on the world stage. And the percentage of people who actually want to engage with North Korea and trust North Korea has gone way up too. So there was a recent poll of about something like 65% said they believed and had faith in what Kim Jong-un had said when he visited the South in the summit on April 27th. Briefly visited the South on April 27th, and so. There's this really, the hopes are very high that this time it can work out. And I think that they want to proceed no matter what the United States does, people in Korea, because they've been having this fear of war and conflict for long enough. And they want to move forward on ending the war. So, and as you know, Women Cross DMZ and the Nobel Women's Initiative, which have been working with women, peacemakers around the world. They are there in Korea right now, in Seoul right now. They actually wanted to go to North Korea, but the U.S. would not give travel visas to any Americans going there. But they're there, and they've been meeting with. They had a good meeting with the U.S. Embassy, and they had a demonstration at the U.S. Embassy last night. And many Korean groups were also there, demonstrating. And so I think there's this very strong feeling in South Korea now that they've reached a point where they're almost there. They're on the verge of a very strong agreement and something that could be a breakthrough and really ease the tensions and get back to a place when the two sides are engaging again in all kinds of ways. And then suddenly Trump and this tantrum he throws closes the door on it. People were really disappointed to hear and really angry to hear that the summit had been canceled, except for this very small minority of about 20%, 18 to 20%, that wants Trump to bomb North Korea and wants a war. People that think like Lindsey Graham, and that's a very small minority though, and so you have these they're the people that love the idea of the talk of war, but I think the people in South Korea, and let's remember that Moon Jae-in came to power on the wave of this candlelight revolution against a president they saw as dictatorial and corrupt, and was also very militaristic in her approach to North Korea, and the candlelight revolution led to her impeachment. And that's how Moon Jae-in won. So he's got the people. I mean, the people are really strongly behind this. And I think it's kind of ironic to see even, so many American critics, both from the conservative side, neocons and liberals, who are against, talking with Kim Jong-un and against this kind of, direct engagement. They're siding with this very small right-wing, very extreme right-wing minority in South Korea.
Tim, speaking of the neocon liberal consensus when it comes to North Korea in the U.S., let me put you two narratives that I've seen to explain the cancellation of this summit, not blaming Trump and the gang around him, but saying two things. One is that Kim Jong-un played Donald Trump, that this was his plan all along. And two, this was curious to me. There was a big piece on NBCnews.com by Andrea Mitchell called "The North Korea Summit Crumbled After China Lined Up Against It." And it quotes Western officials or Western experts, quote unquote, and Western officials, current and former, basically saying that China fears a unified Korea. It doesn't want to see a capitalist democracy so close to it. And it played a major role in canceling the summit, also because it felt like it was on the sidelines.
Well, I don't think China had anything to do with the cancellation at all. I mean, these issues that I spoke about before involving, the Libya option, Bolton, Pence, and then military exercises were there before Kim Jong-un went to China the second time. And, in fact, on some issues, like on the issue of troop withdrawal, U.S. troop withdrawal from South Korea, for example, the Chinese have a stronger position on this than the North Koreans do. The North Koreans have told the U.S., not only in this round of negotiations, but also in past negotiations, that might be able to live with presence of American forces in South Korea after a peace agreement. And, when you talk privately with Koreans who are knowledgeable about that, they say that, in some ways, the North Koreans see the potential for U.S. forces to be a kind of check on China's power in Asia itself. I mean, you have to understand that North Korea's relations with China are not great, and North Korea has always resisted attempts by China to run its affairs or intervene in its affairs and sort of control the whole way it deals with the United States. And China and North Korea has resisted that. So, it was natural that the Chinese would invite Kim there. He went there twice. And at, his first trip, that was the first time he'd ever met the Chinese leadership. So, he's had very poor relations with them for, years since he really came to power. And in fact, kind of eliminated a faction within the Workers' Party in North Korea that was closely allied with China and were making all the money from the trade with China. So, it's like I said, it's of course they're going to meet with him and they want to be on the same page when it comes to negotiation on peace. And China can play an important role in helping to guarantee the peace. And they would have to sign any kind of peace agreement because they were one of the signatories of the armistice in 1953, along with the United States and North Korea. So they have that role to play. But to say that they're the ones that influence this cancellation, I think is ridiculous. And NBC is they're just following that line, because so many of the national security people here in Washington, the whole focus, of course, is on China and the rise of China and fears of China, military power, and so on. But it doesn't mean that they don't carefully analyze and they don't really know anything about China's actual relationship with North Korea, which has been very rocky at times.
Right. And if China is a major reason why the U.S. has, over 27,000 U.S. troops there with an eye on China, then that would make it understandable then why hawkish militarists in Washington would be upset at the prospect of possibly those forces being withdrawn under a potential U.S. North Korea deal. But finally, Tim, let me ask you. So you have a plane ticket to go to Singapore to cover the planned summit that was canceled. So are you keeping your reservation?
Right now, I'm keeping it. I mean, yesterday I almost canceled it, but then I figured, well, things might change, and actually within an hour, he was he was backing up from what he'd said earlier yesterday. So yes, I'm keeping my ticket. I'm keeping my hotel reservations. I got all my information at the White House travel office. And if it happens, I'll go. And, maybe it won't happen on June 12th, but I have a feeling that this summit is going to happen because, the statement that the North Koreans put out yesterday, this Deputy Minister Kim, was actually, they actually had kind of kind words for Trump even after he'd canceled it. And, he stuck up for the woman, Chae Sun-hee, who had written this bitter, blistering polemic that set Trump off. He, backed her up, but they also said, they're willing to talk, and they're willing to talk to the U.S. anytime. So, if anything, North Korea is coming out of this, looking pretty level-headed and looking, kind of moderate in terms of their negotiating strategy, where Trump looks completely incompetent.
Not for the first time. Well, we'll leave it there.
Not
Tim
for
Shorrock,
the first time.
Correspondent for The Nation. His blog, Dispatch Korea, is available at timshorrock.com. Tim, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on The Real News.